Welcome to the Diverse Minds podcast, where we give you the tips, tools, and techniques you need to be a mentally healthy and inclusive leader. Each week, you'll hear about a variety of topics linked to mental health, well-being, and diversity that will enhance both your professional practice and personal well-being. Welcome to the 139th episode of the award-winning Diverse Minds podcast. And this month's focus is all about music and mental health. And today we're going to be talking more about drum and bass, one of my favorite kinds of music, as many of you all know, mental health, in particular male musicians. And to join me in doing this, I'm so honored to welcome drum and bass musician MiteKiss. He has over 2 decades of experience and an impressive collection of his signature soul-infused releases on some of the most formidable labels across the drum and bass spectrum, including imprints such as Shogun, Chase and Status, MTA, Skankandbass. Since signing to Hospital Records back in 2018, MiteKiss has become a staple figure in the scene, crafting out his very own unique sonic style. From the tender age of 15, the London native has been sculpting his sound through exotic experimentation of other diverse genres that eventually lead him to a steady heartbeat of 174 BPM. MiteKiss began to pick up the momentum when Void, a free track on Skankandbass, caught the attention of Shogun Audio head honcho Friction. Many of you might know that as DJ Friction. Among dropping his own sonic gems, MiteKiss also runs his own label, Goldfat Records, with Mr. Porter, which continues to grow year on year whilst nurturing some of the most promising future talents in the world of drum and bass. And in 2018, he's dropped his debut album, Crate 6-7, with further proved his musical versatility as he explored the sounds of ambient jungle, liquid jazz, soul across 14 stunning tracks. 2020 saw the release of his incredibly curated Objects to Push EP Home, to the widely popular single Matter featuring Ruth Royal. With his recent album, Bolivian Hotel Bistro, which was released on Friday, the 25th of Feb, 2022, don't take your eyes off MiteKiss as he continues to trailblaze his way to the top of the liquid drum and bass sphere. His multifaceted approach to drum and bass as an artist, label owner, mentor, and all-round tastemaker prove his commitment and love for the sound. So I was so excited that you said yes, and MiteKiss, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
We are super excited because you've just launched your album and it's all happening, and I'm really honored that you took the time to speak to us today.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, it's a bit of a mad day this morning. Album's come out. Really excited about that. Really excited to see how it goes, to see how it's received.
We're really excited, and my listeners know I always joke about the fact that I'm a massive drum and bass fan, and also I'm not what people expect. So they look at me and they burst out laughing, and I'm like, why? What does a drum and bass fan look like? Clearly not me.
Yeah. And the perception of drum and bass can be different to like the type you listen to, because it's so varied, drum and bass,
And loads of people think it's passé, and loads of people think it's not made anymore, and I think that's deeply offensive.
I know, or they think it's like just really loud and in your face, but yeah, they just don't know yet, that's all.
Yeah, I mean, I love the loud in your face style. I think I have such good memories from university for that.
Amazing.
So Johnny, I read out your bio and the amazing work that you do, but I wonder if you want to tell listeners in your own voice a little bit more about yourself, the type of drum and bass that you produce, and how you got into it all.
Yeah, sure. So I got into drum and bass when I was a young teenager, about 14. In fact, I started making music when I was about 14. And because of my siblings, my older brother and sister, they were both really into jungle and drum and bass at the time. And naturally, obviously, being quite a bit younger than them, I wanted to follow their lead. So that was like my first intro into it. Growing up around Croydon, South London, obviously you hear it a lot anyway. So it was just part of my childhood, and it's something that was always in the background. I made music. I've been making music since I was about 14, so like 20 years. And it's just always been there in the background of my life wherever I am. So it's just part of my life, really. But myself, I make drum and bass. I would say it's kind of soulful drum and bass, if you like. I don't like to label it, because I kind of like, if you listen to the new album, you'll hear it's quite varied. And there's some jazzy stuff on there, some harder stuff, some liquidy bits. I suppose I'd like to call it soulful if you had to pigeonhole it. I also run a record label called Goldfat Records with my brother-in-law. At the moment, I'm trying to create more and more helpful content for people just getting into music production as well. So I've just started putting a bit of effort into my YouTube channel and TikTok and stuff to just try and speed up the process for other people, so it doesn't take them 20 years like it took me. And I have a part-time job as a creative lead at our marketing agency. So that's kind of my day job, doing a lot of web design, digital design stuff.
So am I right in thinking you don't actually do live shows? You don't DJ, or you don't DJ at the moment anyway?
No, it's something I've done in the past. In my early 20s, I was in an electro duo, and we did a little bit of touring around Europe, and I played live. I played live keyboard actually, but it's now later on. It's not something that's really ever grabbed me, DJing. I really respect the craft. You know, I've grown up around DJs everywhere, but personally, it's just never been for me. I've tried it like various times, and I've tried to get into it. You know, I bought decks and stuff to really try and push myself, but it's just not. It just doesn't work for me. So yeah, I think I'm the only artist on Hospital Records that doesn't perform, which must be very frustrating for them.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Because I think people will often think as drum and bass of just as a club thing, right? That, oh,
Yeah.
you know, drum and bass DJs, as opposed to it being, not as opposed to, but DJing being a bigger part of it than the production and musical side of it.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, it is, you know, inherently it is dance floor music, made for a dance floor. So obviously you can see why people assume that. But, you know, there's a lot of amazing drum and bass that is kind of home listening, if you like. Home listening sounds like it's terrible, but do you know what I mean? It's not.
Yeah.
It can be really enjoyed outside of a club. And I've always been that type of producer, actually. I've always thought more about the person wearing headphones or commuting to work than I have about someone on a dance floor. And I think most people can probably hear that in the music I make. I like to think so anyway.
Yeah, well, now that you've said that, definitely I can, and that's really interesting. And I think for so many of us, I mean, it's partly COVID, and partly when I go to a club, I feel like the oldest person there now. So I think having drum and bass music that we enjoy at home is really vital. I think as different stages of life come in and out.
Yeah, definitely, no, absolutely. And like I say, there are some like really long form masterpieces, like, you know, even going back to Timeless by Goldie. That stuff is definitely home listening, right? Sounds incredible just listening to it on a nice record. So yeah, there's definitely room for it. There's room for all dance music to be enjoyed at home, and especially for those who no longer want to go clubbing.
Yeah. And so thinking about mental well-being and drum and bass in music, how do you feel drum and bass supports your mental well-being?
It's an interesting question. I suppose I would ask you in what regard.
And so, okay, I'll wind it back then and say to you, what
Okay.
does the term mental health mean to you? So when you hear that term and relate it to yourself, how would you define mental health and well-being for yourself?
I suppose for myself, I would just define it like I would define physical health. Like it's just, you know, it's in the same part of me. I mean, I've struggled with mental health a lot in the past, so it's really important to me, as important as keeping just, you know, physically healthy. So yeah, to me it means just looking after yourself, really.
And how does music and producing drum and bass music help you to do that?
Well, it's I mean, producing music's like is an outlet, a creative outlet, which is, I think, I would say really is part of mental health. For people that are creative, it really helps sometimes to kind of just lock yourself away and get down whatever it is you have inside of you. Like it's almost like a form of therapy. But, you know, like I say, going back, when I was younger in my early 20s, I had a real tough time with anxiety, to the point of I couldn't have a job anymore. I couldn't go into work because effectively over the period of like a week or two, I developed this like crippling social anxiety. And it literally came from nowhere. It came from commuting to work one day, and out of nowhere, it kind of just hit me like a bus. Like it's really so hard to explain to people, but effectively on my way to work one day, and just I had this really overwhelming feeling. And I'm sure now, looking back now, and this is more than 10 years ago, right? So looking back now, it was most likely a panic attack from what you hear, but it kind of hit me really hard. I had to kind of get away from work, get home, and then at first, in my naivety and being young, I just thought I'd like had some sort of bug or was just ill. And then so like a few days later, I started to feel a little bit better. I hadn't left my house yet, and I went to like go and commute back into London. And I remember getting to the train station, and it was the weirdest thing, right? The train pulled up, and I just started like sweating. My hands were like getting really wet. I had the weirdest feeling. The doors open, and I kid you not, I couldn't like move my leg to even get on the train. It was such a bizarre feeling. And it's really hard for anyone to understand that unless they've been through it. But I genuinely couldn't even get on this train, and I could nothing could have made me get on. Right? No, it doesn't matter what. was happening. I just couldn't have got on. Then I thought, okay, something's not, this isn't like a physical illness. Something's not right here. I feel like I was smart enough to kind of work out that this is definitely some form of anxiety, And then, at that point, I had to basically go back home. I was back at my dad's at the time, and he was kind of like, he kind of worked out what was going on. I tried again a few times, wasn't happening. I eventually had to call the place I work for and explain my situation to them, which was well embarrassing. It's like, it's really hard to talk about. It's easier for me now to talk about it, but at the time it was like impossible to talk about it to anyone. I didn't tell anyone, by the way. Didn't tell any of my friends, even my family. Only my dad knew about it at the start. And I had to explain to my boss what was going on. They were really cool. They gave me like some time, I think 4 weeks to see what would happen, but nothing happened. I then went and ended up on sick pay, and then that eventually that to say, look, we can't keep employing you. So I lost my job, and I was totally cool with that because I understood their point of view as a business as well. I've got no resentment there, but lost my job, and then I was like, what am I going to do? Like I literally couldn't even leave my house. Became a bit of a recluse. It got worse. It got to the point where like I couldn't even go to like the local shop sort of thing. So eventually, I've gone off on a bit of a track here, haven't I?
The thing is, though, I think it's so. A, thank you so much for sharing. But B, I think it's so important to hear because the things you've talked about, it came out of nowhere, and it's really difficult often for people to connect with that. And I think often there's a reason people may experience mental ill health, but often there isn't. And I think especially with anxiety, it really can be like, I know people who have described it like a monster hijacking you and you don't know where it's come from.
Yeah, literally. I mean, one of my dad always reckons that it might be like a delayed response to the London bombings, because I was commuting at the time, right in the center of London, right near where it happened. But I thought nothing of it at the time. I was fine, But he seems to think that may be a reason, or it's multiple factors. But like I say, in my head, it came from nowhere, and I've got no reason as to why. Could be a combination of things, but yeah, pushing on. I mean, it got, like I say, like I was so bad I couldn't even get to the shop. So eventually I called up NHS, and explained my situation. They put me in touch with someone who did CBT, and it was quite quick actually. Back then it was a bit quicker to get responses, and I spoke to someone who was really good. I think they were new at the job, but they were actually really quite good, and they just explained the whole principle of slowly trying bit by bit, like walk to the end of your garden, then walk to the end of the road, the classic CBT stuff.
Yeah.
Which did really help. My dad took that on board. I mean, he worked at the time in the medical profession anyway, so he's quite smart on those things. So he used to take me. He'd be like, "Oh, I'm going shopping. Just come with me," and he would slowly help me get out of that, like just being stuck in the house. And we're talking over the space of, I'd say I'd only really truly got over it. I don't think you're ever fully over it, but I would say back to like 90%, just being, it not being afflicted by it. I would say maybe 5 years ago. So a good 15 years of, don't know what the right term is, just
recovery pathway.
I'd say
recovery
recovery. Yeah. I was going to say rehabilitation, but it's not quite that. It's like, like recovery. But having said that, sorry, I'm leaping in my brain, just going back. I got to that point where, it was slowly getting better and better, and my dad really helped me out. And then I told a few more of my family, a couple of friends, and everyone was very understandable. And you never think they will be, right? You don't know how people are going to react, and for some reason, it's embarrassing, I suppose, because no one else at the time, not for me anyway, no one else I knew said something like that to me or had something similar. I'm sure there were lots of them, but I never heard it. So it's really embarrassing to say, oh, how come you're not coming out, or why you're not going to work, to be able to say, oh, I can't leave my house. It's like, I think it's hard for people to understand that, because they just think, oh, what people think. They're like, oh, get over it, just step out the door. But it's like, you literally can't. It's so hard to explain that. But it took about 15 years to slowly recover. And I think having people around me that understood and being able to talk to people really, really helped. My partner, my family, and some of my friends, like just being completely honest with them actually really helped the recovery as well. And the CBT element did work. It took ages, but it did work. And so now, I can do what I need to do. I can go on public transport and I don't get those same feelings anymore. Every now and then, like once or twice a year, you might get a little crop up of anxiety, but then it's probably the most common level of anxiety that people feel anyway about certain situations. But every time I feel it now, I assume it's my past. And so it's like you get a little trigger of normal anxiety that you would get, say, traveling, for example, right? Everyone gets a little bit of anxiety when they're about to travel, but now I'll get it and I'll assume I'm like, oh no, it's happening again. It's all going to come crashing down. So it's very hard to distinguish now between a common level of anxiety and actually, the past. It makes it really difficult.
And you said something else, I think, that's really important, which was like, I just didn't want to tell anyone about it. There was one person that knew that was super helpful, your dad. But just all that stigma, and it is really scary. And I always say it feels easier to suffer in silence because it's so terrifying telling people. I know we have great campaigns in this country about time to talk, we need to talk, but actually saying those words is not easy.
I know. Yeah, that was one of the hardest things to just, sit down, even to tell my dad at first, just to explain what you were feeling, or it's so hard to tell people, like especially like friends and stuff. I did eventually, about 2 or 3 years later, I did tell my friends when we were all out actually somewhere. So by that point I was able to actually go out, but it was still like a massive challenge to say, to like go to the pub, for example, 3 or 4 years later was like an incredible challenge, like the hardest thing I've ever done, harder than any job, any music making, any of this stuff. Like just to get to a pub and sit there and be okay was almost impossible. But I did, at one of those moments, I do remember telling a group of my mates all at once, sort of thing, this is what I've been going through, and they were like super supportive, and then they related stories about people they know, etc. And usually everyone, in fact no one has ever not been supportive, but it's just that initial embarrassment, if you like. But then often I found, like, when you mention it to people, they also bring up similar anxieties that they may have had, in different regards, but they've never spoken about as well. So it kind of works both ways. As soon as one person opens up about it, other people around you seem to also open up about it. So clearly talking about it works for everyone.
Yeah, it's a unifying force, but it's getting to that point, isn't it?
Yeah, that's one of the hardest bits for sure.
And when you were experiencing these feelings of anxiety and you couldn't leave the house, were you making music at this point?
Actually, no. At the start, I wasn't. I was kind of getting back into it because I've always done it, but I had a bit of an off spell at that period. But actually, I did. Once I worked out what it was and started to become comfortable with it, if you like, I did start to make music again. Yeah. I never released those tunes. There's like, I think I made about 6 tracks, varying tempos that I've still got, but I never ever released them or even put them out. But I did, and they were all kind of like related to what was going on, what I was doing, how I was feeling. So I did, and that really helped actually, because like I was saying earlier, like being creative is really helpful for mental health, I think, because it just kind of focuses your mind for a bit and takes your mind off of things as well, and it just uses a different part of your brain, I guess. So I find it therapeutic. I always have done, though, before that episode. Like I've always made music as a hobby, regardless of any outcome. Doesn't matter. Like I'd still be doing it now, even if I wasn't putting music out or no one heard it. I'd still be making it, just because it's a bit like painting, right? It's just very therapeutic and enjoyable for me as a hobby. I mean, I'm very lucky that it's turned into more than that. But yeah, it is very therapeutic. I would say that. I mean, that alongside talking to people, and what I found more recently actually is being more active has really helped as well. That's something I probably wasn't at the time, but over the last kind of year or so, actually getting more into being active has also helped on a different level, actually. Not quite related to the anxiety stuff, but really helps clear my brain, actually. Like if I go out for a cycle, for example, it really helps to think about things and just clear stuff out. It's almost like you're just flushing crap out whilst you're cycling. And then by the end of it, you've got kind of a bit of a game plan. It's a bit of a weird one, but I know lots of people talk about exercise as being good for the mind. And yeah, I totally agree.
And do you think, from your perspective, that one of the stigma areas is that for men, so being male, and also the expectations people have in our society, toxic masculinity. And I don't know if you have any thoughts as well about the culture of mental well-being within the drum and bass world, actually.
Yeah, I think generally the drum and bass world can be quite open-minded and upfront about these things. A lot, there are a few popular artists that have talked about mental health, and there have been some good articles and stuff. So generally, I think it's pretty good at it. I read something recently though, right, that something like 70% of musicians report symptoms of mental illness. And it was after you asked me to come on here, and it was just, I just happened to see an article about it between, and I just thought it was really interesting how many musicians suffer from mental illness. And I just like wonder what the link is there. That's more of a question really than a statement, but
yeah, I wonder whether it's links back to what you said, and I don't have any evidence for this, but it's a creative outlet. People use it as a creative outlet. It's very healing for mental ill health, whether it's diagnosed or you're having a low period. But then if things get so uncomfortable, or you don't deal with the underlying causes potentially, then music still helps, but you still might not be sleeping, you might not be talking to people, and all of those other things. So it comes as part of a package, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And I also think for performing musicians, like those guys who are doing, I only had a very short experience of it, and not to the scale of some of these dudes, but they'll do, they'll play to thousands of people on a Friday night, and then it just turns back off and they're back on their own again for a week, and then it's back on a Friday night. Like it's an incredible roller coaster to go through, for any person. That's not normal. Do you know what I mean? It's not like you're not isolated for a whole week in your studio, for example, and then on Friday you jump on a plane and then you play in front of 5,000 people for an hour. They're all screaming at you, and then you're back off and you're on your own again. That's quite a challenge, I'd imagine, mentally.
Yeah,
for lots of people. I mean, I did like I said, I did a little bit of it, and that was really difficult. I found that really difficult, and I'm sure it plays a factor in why I don't perform as well, because it's like, and I've spoken with the label about this, right? It's been so difficult. Like it's been 20 years of my life that it's where I've got to. It's taken me 20 years of my life to get to like recover. So the thought of like, say I start performing again or something, and that brings up memories of that social anxiety. When I think about stuff like performing, I do get little twinges of that. And so it's like, if I was to go and do that, and it brought any of that back and it put me back at all, I'd be devastated. Like I'm in such a good place everywhere else in my life now that it's just it's really not worth it to me. Like I don't think I could put myself back through that, and I definitely wouldn't want to risk it, even though it definitely holds me back in terms of my reach, if you like, and the amount of people like my music can get to. But for the sake of my mental health, it's still not worth it. Even if it was like, oh, you get the chance to perform in front of 10,000 people who's going to hear your new album, that still isn't enough. Nothing is enough to make me want to risk my mental health again. There is nothing you could offer me, no amount of money or performing, that would make me change that, because it's not you can't quantify it, can you? It's just part of me now, and I've learned to like live with it. And also, I just want to add, I've learned to actually appreciate it. And I know this sounds silly, but without that situation and what happened to me, I wouldn't have gone down the path I went. So in my early 20s, when I couldn't work, right, I still needed to get an income. So I ended up starting my own business because I could do it from home and I didn't have to have an employer. I ended up starting my own business, and that went on for 10 years or 10 or 12 years, and it was successful. I never would have done it, right? I started a digital agency. We got up to like 10 staff. It was pretty cool, all because I couldn't go into work because of my anxiety or commute. And then, so I look back now and I think all of these things that have happened because of that. And the whole music thing, getting signed to hospital, that's all related to that path of what I was doing. Meeting my partner, for example, at my workplace, which was mine, which I did because of my anxiety. And now, you know, she's my fiance. It's like, and we own a house together. So all of that like progression that's come from that, I don't know what path I would have been on if I hadn't experienced that. But there's also so many positives that have come from it as well. Like being more empathetic is a massive one. That's one thing that slaps you around the face, is whenever you almost get this like sixth sense of other people's anxiety when you've been through it really badly. You can sense it, you can see it. Like you go into meetings or whatever, and you can just see the micro hand trembles or the tone of voice, and you know, because you're so in tune with anxiety, you know when someone else is ever so slightly feeling it, and then that allows you to like put them more at ease. You can just address it and make sure they're comfortable without them even, they might not know that you know, but you do know because you know what it's like. So it definitely increases your empathy for sure, I think. So there are like, weirdly, there are masses of positives that come from it too.
And then my dear friend Steph Cutler, who runs a business called Making Lemonade, says exactly that. She calls them a gift. She says it's a gift, but she says sometimes we have receipt days where you want to give it back, but most of the time, she talks about seeing her vision loss. She's a visual impairment that's genetic. She says it's a gift, but some days I wish I had the receipt, but most of the time I can see it as something really amazing. So really echoes to what you said.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. She's put that more succinctly than I have. But yeah, no, definitely, totally is.
And so what's your advice if, people are listening right now and they really want to create music, potentially they're not in a great space, maybe with diagnosed mental health condition, undiagnosed mental health condition, they're just feeling low, pandemic still ongoing. What would be your advice? So there might be someone who's fearful but wants to have a go at it, and they know it would have a positive impact on their mental health. What's your thoughts about where someone could start?
I mean, generally speaking, like starting anything is daunting. And it's a bit like, say this week I had this passion to become a chef, and I thought, you know what, I really want to be a chef. I think a lot of people might often assume that the next step is just to be a really good chef and like jump straight into a restaurant. Oh my God, I'm under all this pressure. I've got this brigade. How am I going to get this food out right? But the truth is, it's just small steps. Everything is baby steps. And I think, say, using that chef analogy, if you wanted to be a chef, tomorrow you might just try a new recipe that you've never tried before at home. And then a month later, you might enroll into a local cookery college and take some classes. And then 3 months down the line, you might get a job in the pub, right? Just like as a sous chef or just working in the kitchen. And slowly, a year later, 2 years later, you may be a chef in a really cool restaurant. So it's starting anything. I think don't try and ever think of the end result, because that's always really daunting, and that does not play well with your mind. Like your mind goes to places. It's scary when you think of stuff like that. So I think in small steps and just be really easy on yourself. I've said multiple times before as well that I'm not a massive fan of the phrase like just work hard and things will happen, because as we know, really, it's not about hard work. It's most of the time it is luck, just being in the right place. Like I always think it's like 70% luck, 30% talent, because the hardest workers don't always do the best, right? Most of the hardest workers are NHS staff or bus drivers, right, who earn the lowest wages. So that whole work hard mindset is really bad as well, I think. But yeah, in terms of not feeling good enough, that's a tough one, because I think we all, especially in the music game, we all suffer from a little bit of that. Yeah, envy when you hear someone else's album and you're like, oh my God, how did they do that? And it just makes your own stuff feel rubbish. Like that happens all the time. That happens to me all the time. I always get imposter syndrome, or generally I'll listen to someone else's and just want to give up, like, which is very annoying, but it happens a lot. So I suppose I would just say, just try a little bit, just take it easy, step by step. Don't worry too much about the outcome.
And not to put that pressure on yourself, right?
Yeah.
So have fun with it and see where it leads you. And I totally agree with you. Your point about NHS workers, bus drivers, absolutely.
Yeah.
Public transport staff, we do not value those people. The people that take our bins every week. I always walk out on my street and I look at them and I think you do phenomenal work.
That's what I mean about hard work, right?
Yeah, it's just flipping hard work. Yeah.
That's hard work when you're up at 5 a.m. cleaning people's bins, right? And grafting. That's hard work. So I really don't like it when people say, "I'll just work hard."
Yeah.
Right?
What does that mean?
People just work hard and they stay on minimum wage. So that's just rubbish.
Yeah, it's so true. So thank you for mentioning that as well, because I think you're right. In society, we don't value the right things, especially not at the moment. But that's another podcast, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So you've mentioned some of the things that you do to look after your mental health and well-being, but is there anything, I always ask my guests, what are your top 3 tips? Is there anything specific you want to share with listeners about that? Any 3 tips that you'd like to leave them with? For
mental health in general?
Yeah.
I would say, I think I've touched upon these already, but I would say talking to people, which I went into depth of how difficult that is. But even if there's one person, and if there isn't, then if you don't feel comfortable talking to someone, actually, it was really helpful for me as well. Calling NHS and speaking to someone I didn't know was probably the easiest person to speak to about it, because there was no judgment. I didn't fear any judgment, and they were professionals, right? And when you're in a low place, you do need professional help. So I think firstly speaking to someone professional as well is a really good idea. But anyone close to you who you feel like you can speak to about it it makes you feel so much better afterwards, after speaking to someone. And even often, like now, when little things pop up, the occasional like tremors, now speaking to my partner, I'll be like, oh, I feel like this about this thing coming up or whatever. Just, it's so helpful to hear someone else's point of view, and especially when that hopefully that person's understanding though, and doesn't push back and just listens. And I'm lucky to have that person. But speaking to people, being creative when you are feeling a certain way, I think getting your head down and just playing on your keyboard or even just on your computer trying to make music is really, I find it really therapeutic and really useful. It really helps with my mindset, because it's, like I say, I think it uses a different part of the brain and makes you kind of focus on the creative side of your brain, which just kind of everything else kind of melts away for a few hours. And I know it's, like producers often talk about getting into a flow state where just time disappears. Like when you're really in the zone and you're making a track, for example, and something good's happening, all of a sudden you're in and you're just laying down another idea. And then you genuinely, and other people will be able to tell you this that make music, you look up and it's like 5 hours later and it feels like it's been half an hour or an hour, and you don't want to eat, you don't want to stop to even go get a drink, go toilet. It's a really weird feeling, but it happens for people who do creative stuff. And that, the more time you can spend in that creative state is the better, obviously, because it just feels amazing. And thirdly, I think just being active. I think this one's come a bit later in life for me, but just like even like going for a walk, if you've got somewhere you can just go for a walk, just fresh air, or like going to the gym or go for a cycle, go for a run. A little bit of exercise really does, well, we all know it releases, so we know it works scientifically, it helps. So that's something that can really help. But yeah, primarily speaking to a professional and talking about it if you can.
Yeah, thank you so much. And just before we close, I wondered if you wanted to play listeners one of the tracks from your new album.
That would be amazing. Yes, this one is called Droplets and it's featuring Barwi. And yeah, it's from the new album Bolivian Hotel Bistro.
Thank you so much for sharing that track with us. If people want to know more about you and your work, how would you like them to connect with you, get in contact, and buy your brilliant new album and the previous albums too?
Yeah, for sure. And people often, I get messages about mental health as well. I'm obviously not a professional. I just want to add that in. But people do send me, because every now and then I make a little post about something to do with mental health or anxiety. And often I'll get people straight away like DM me saying they're feeling a certain way. How did I get past certain bits, etc. But I'm always open to that. If anyone's struggling and they need someone to talk to, I'm not a professional, and I would say seek professional help. But I'm always willing to help if I can. But the way to contact me is just all my social media platforms are just at MiteKiss, which is MiteKiss across Facebook, Instagram, etc. YouTube, all the same.
And I will, of course, include those links in the show notes. And actually, before we wrap up, I just wondered what made you choose the name MiteKiss?
It's totally, there's no meaning behind it. And it doesn't mean might kiss as in want to kiss.
Yeah, what might kiss someone, yeah.
Yeah, it really doesn't. It's totally random. I made a song years and years ago. I think it was called Dust Mites. And I really liked MITE, the way it looked. And then I just randomly put two words together, genuinely. And I was thinking, working in digital, I was thinking about Google as well and search results, which has worked in my favor, obviously, because there is no other word like that. And just having a unique name. So it was just, there's not much behind it other than just timing and randomness, to be honest.
Oh, brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time, your generosity, sharing your story, being so open, and taking the time to come on this podcast, which isn't exclusively about music, which is more about mental health, inclusion and culture. Really appreciate it. A joy to meet you, and really, of course, looking forward to listening to your album over and over again. And hopefully this podcast will get other people into your work as well.
Thank you so much for having me. And it's great what you guys are doing, and I really appreciate being on the show. So thank you.
Thank you so much, MiteKiss. Take care. And listeners, please take care of yourself, and we will see you in the next episode. Bye for now. Thanks for listening to the Diverse Minds podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you access your podcasts from. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Tune into next week's episode of the podcast, where I'll bring you more insights on mental health and inclusion. Bye for now.